Income Tax 2020, Practice Problem 1, Part 8, Data Input, State Refund, Unemployment, and Gambling Winnings. This time we're going to put it in the format of a formula using an Excel worksheet. Come in, relax with Income Tax 2020. Here we are in our Lacerte Tax software. You don't need the Lacerte Tax software to follow along, although I do think they have a 30-day free trial. So if you can get access to a demo version of Lacerte or any other tax software, it could be a good tool to practice with. We're going to be continuing on with our practice problem, this time entering data into our Excel worksheet, which is in the format of a formula. In prior presentations, we've been entering the data into first the tax return with the use and help of the tax software, and then going and entering that same information into a tax formula worksheet, which helps us to basically better visualize the impact of each individual transaction, as well as to double check the transactions that we do in the data input process. So in prior presentations, we entered the data into the 1040, the W-2 information, the interest information, the dividend information, the capital loss information. Now we're going to be focusing in on primarily these other income type items, which will include, if I go then to the Schedule 1, we had some income related to unemployment compensation, gambling winnings, and then we also have the state refund that we're going to be dealing with. So once again, we're going to do this kind of separately, as if we're taking it simply from the source documents, the 1099s and W-2s and whatnot, and put that into our Excel worksheet separately as to when we put it into the worksheet here, so that we can then compare and contrast them and be less likely to have a data input error. So I'm going to then go back on over to the worksheet. So we've entered everything thus far up to the point in time that now we're going to be adding these new items here in our Excel worksheet. So I'm going to go back on over, and we're going to be picking up then the state refund. So we had a state refund of the $2,700. Now, once again, the state refund is something that unless you got a benefit for it in the prior year, you're not going to have to include it in income, is the general rule. So if I go back on over to my Excel worksheet here, then I can see they're taking the standard deduction. So it's not likely that they got a benefit from it last year, because you would only get a benefit if they were itemizing and they took the state tax deduction. So they'd have to be in a state that has state income tax typically, right? We're talking generally state income tax refund, overpaid in the prior year, got to deduct it in the prior year, 2019 in this case, as an itemized deduction. And therefore this year, if they got a refund, they should have to record that in income, considering they got a tax benefit from a payment that they didn't really make last year because they got it back. But so the general idea is that if it was in the itemized deductions last year, we'd include it. In the income line here, we would be including it in the income. I'm not going to include it here, however, due to the fact that they're not they didn't itemize last year. So you might put a note in the software, like you might put a note here saying, hey, they had a refund, but I don't think they itemized last year or something like that. But I'm just not going to include it at this time. So that takes care of this one. Then we're going to go to the unemployment. So the unemployment compensation, that is something that will typically have to be included. So that'll be in like the other income section. So notice on the tax return, we had it on a separate schedule. It went on Schedule 1 that flowed in to the first page, which is included here in line 8. We're just going to put all income lines, all income, in one line item on the form to visualize it in a formula, and then use a separate worksheet to feed into it. So that's going to be on our income worksheet. I'm going to put the unemployment, which is now going to be the unemployment was 300. So 300. That will then impact the total down here, the 83,430, which is part of the income. Also, what's included in income is the Schedule D. So the Schedule D is included in the income as well. And that then pulls over to the tax formula. We're now at the 80,430. So the next item we're going to take a look at is the gambling. We had some gambling winnings. So 600 on gambling winnings. Once again, this is kind of a miscellaneous type of income item. We'd have to include it in income. So I'll put it in the other items. If on the tax return, on the actual tax return, that's going to go into the Schedule 1 other items here, gambling winnings. In our worksheet, of course, we're just going to include it in basically income line item. And so I'm just going to put it into our income worksheet. And I'm going to say that we had gambling winnings of, what was it, 600? 600. So I'm just going to say 600. And that puts our total income up to the 8430. So the 84,030 plus the Schedule D, which had a loss of the 3,000 that we get to take. And that's pulling over to line 1, which is the 8130 now. Adjusted gross income, 8130, 24.8. Standard deduction being taken, bringing down the taxable income to the 56,230. So if we check that on over on our tax return now, we're going to say, all right, there's the 80, and there's our, I would first check this line item, right? There's the 8130. So I'm going to say there's the 8130. If that line item was incorrect, then we'd have to go back each line by line. I'd have to go back up and say, okay, here's the 80,000 W-2 wages, and here's the 80,000 W-2 wages. There's the 1380 for interest. There's the 1380. There's the ordinary dividends or all dividends, and there's the dividends. So that makes sense. And then there's the 300 and the 600 adding up to 900, which should tie out to this 900. And there's the $3,000 loss, which is on the Schedule D. And there's the $3,000 loss. All that then feeding into, for us, the first line item, the 8130. For the tax return, there's the 8130. Then we have no above the line deductions. We'll talk about them later. We got the 24,800 of the standard deduction, bringing us down to that 56,230, and that's what we have here as well. The tax, I'm going to rely on the software now to calculate the tax. I'm not going to try to do it in Excel. You could do a nice, pretty complicated kind of formula to do the, the tables and whatnot. But I'm going to let the software do it. That's going to be the 6,196. So I'm going to say 6196. And then we see the 8,000 we do have in there because that's the payments that came from the W-2s. That means we got the refund at this point, 1,804. So that's going to be the 1,804 going back on over the 1,804. So that lines up. Now the gambling winnings, you might jot down, on the gambling winnings. So the gambling winnings, if they itemize, see if they have losses. So, right, it would only be beneficial if they itemize. So when we go to the itemized section, if we determine, hey, they're itemizing now, then we might want to ask them about the gambling losses. If they don't itemize, then maybe we don't want to ask them about that. So that's where we're going to be at this point in time. We basically entered the main stuff that we got forms for, that being the income side of things. And then in the next couple sections, we'll continue on this with the above the line, below the line deductions, and possibly a Schedule E and a Schedule C, maybe business income and rental income.